Hey, what's up guys? My name is Moda and welcome back to the Mining Stacker YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to talk about a hot topic that I'm sure you're seeing all over the place. We're going to talk about what the hell is altcoin season? What does it really entail? How long does it last? Are we in it already? What things are we looking at? And what can we expect, right? I'm going to try to break it down as easy as possible. We're not going to get too crazy with the charts. We're going to simplify it as much as possible as far as my take on it, what to expect, what to look for, because the signs are already all kind of there. You're going to hear a lot of arguments, whether it started already, whether it hasn't. I kind of disagree with a lot of the sentiment. We'll talk about it though. We'll give our thoughts. We'll make it make sense. Okay. If that sounds good, guys, stay tuned. Let's get right to this thing. So there's been a lot of debate lately as far as whether it has started, whether we're in it, how long it lasts. And in reality, I think a lot of people don't even really truly know what it fully is. Okay, so we're going to talk about it. We'll give our thoughts. We'll look at the numbers and kind of just talk about overall where we're at in this market. Okay, so if we go by the 4-year cycle, looks like we're really heading into potentially the end of this thing. Now, there's going to be different theories. We do got to start out with a disclaimer. Anything can freaking happen. Okay, there's a possibility we follow the 4-year cycle, and there's another possibility where we don't, where it's potentially broken, all the institutional interest, a lot of things can factor in here, but at the end of the day, I'm still looking at time frames and I'm still looking at indicators, right? This is a big thing. So whether we peak here in the next 3 to 4 months, or it takes 4, 6, 8 months plus, right? At the end of the day, we're still looking at these indicators and we're still looking at these trends where there still is going to be pumps and different things going on, right? You have to kind of pay attention to the market because it is different, right? Every cycle has been different also, right? They've been pretty close. There's a lot of consistencies and a lot of similar trends, right? The one thing we have seen are just different trends, right? So overall, whether we peak here in the next 3 to 4 months or it's farther down the road, we're still going to be looking at these things, right? And currently, as far as looking for like cycle tops, CMC has a lot of great info here for you, right? As far as looking at like market cycle top indicators, whether it's the Peel multiples, pi cycle tops, I mean, the rainbow chart, which a lot of people use, as well as a huge list down here of 30 different indicators, which you can see so far. None of them have triggered. None of them are really close to triggering, right? But the reason we're so focused right now is we are looking at potentially the beginning of an altcoin season. So what is altcoin season? This is one that I hear a lot of different things on. Okay, so in the traditional sense, it's essentially the rotation of capital going from like Bitcoin into alts, right? Which it looks like we're seeing the beginning stages, which we'll look at that data. Now, another train of thought, which is one I probably hear the most, especially in the mining community, is people reference these peaks here and that to them, this is altcoin season. I fully disagree with that. To me, that's a part of the altcoin season, but that's the blow off top portion of the altcoin season. To me, the altcoin season is the beginning of the uptrend. Okay, so we're going to look at a lot of these charts. We're going to go all over the place from huge market caps, mid caps, low caps, micro caps, GPU coins, ASIC coins. We're going to look at the whole gamut and we're going to see a lot of the same similarities all the way through, which is why this is important to kind of know what to look for and why this is such an important thing. Okay. So we'll look at the beginning of things to kind of break it down. So the reason we're so interested in it and the reason we're hearing a lot of people saying that it looks like this is the beginning is because Bitcoin dominance is beginning to break. Okay. And if we look at the previous cycle, right, because a lot of you guys were here in that cycle. So we're going to reference that one, which was a unique cycle also because we did have a double top, but the same things kind of happen on both tops. Okay. So here's a Bitcoin dominance chart. Again, we're going to simplify it. We're not going to go too crazy with it, but you can see the two big things. Okay. We're looking for those drops. Okay. So we're looking for when BTC dominance starts dropping, that's when the rotation into alts potentially starts happening. Okay, so you can clearly see it here with this big drop. It's the orange line back in the 2017 cycle. You can clearly see when it started going down. And what do you notice when that goes down? You can see ETH dominance up, going up, as well as others, which are the altcoins. Okay, so you can see it there. You can see it happening again. Farther down the road and more relevant for us who were here in this 2021 cycle, including myself, you can kind of look at the trend. Okay, here we go. We're in now the end of December 2020, heading into 2021. And this is, you can see kind of the point where things started to change. Okay, when they started going down. So essentially from, let's make it easy, the beginning of the year 2021 down to where it peaked or it bottomed out essentially the first time was in the spring, was in May 2021. Okay, if you guys remember, that was the first peak of the double tops. Okay, we had a lot of crap going on at that time, and that's when things kind of changed. Things later flipped on. So at that point, it was approximately a 5-month period where things kind of went up. Okay, so to me, that was phase one of the altcoin season. Again, last cycle was unique in that we had 2 of them. So for me, it was a 5-month period. It wasn't that like 2-week period of that blow off top. To me, that's the end of it, right? Those are those smaller cap coins. That's when those tended to peak. But we can see, we're going to go through again. We're going to go through a bunch of charts ranging from things of the top 10 all the way to 200, 400, etc. Just so you can kind of see the similarities so you can see what we are looking for. And the reason it's important, because again, it's telling us that there's still time to get into a lot of these alts. Okay. So let's start with some of the bigger guys. As far as the alts go, let's start with Ethereum. Okay, if we look at the all-time chart, again, we're not going to go in too crazy. We're looking for just the overall trend. If we look at this trend, we're going to focus on the 2021 cycle. You can kind of start telling just by glancing at it when we start kind of ticking upwards. Okay, Ethereum had a pretty decent bear market even up to that point, but you can see kind of a bigger deviation once you get up here. Okay, so notice the timeline. What is the date? January 1st, the end of December into January, you can really see where things scaled up. Okay, and we go, go, go. You can see the first peak was when? In May. Okay, see how that lined up pretty damn close. And that doesn't mean it's straight up either, right? If we zoom into it, you'll see these huge peaks. You'll see these huge valleys. It's a lot of ups and downs. It's not straight up either. Everybody gets fixated because we have corrections during that time or things happen. That's part of the game, right? Again, look at the long term and look at what's going on. Let's reference some of these others. Solana at the time, which again, kind of the same thing. Again, if we're eyeballing it, where does the uptrend start? Okay, we're flat, 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 and then here, where is it? It's about January 2021. Okay, some of them did a little bit later, some a little bit sooner, but you can kind of see the same thing. The difference with a lot of these, though, is a lot of them did not have their peak in that first one, in that May 2021. A lot of them didn't peak until the second one. We'll do an overview of the second one also, because to me, that's the one that's more intriguing, because that's what's following what's going on right now. Okay, we'll look at Cardano, which was another big one. So kind of the same thing, just eyeballing the chart. When does it really start trending upwards? About that same time frame. Again, end of December, early January, kind of the same thing. Okay, there's, again, we're going through and we're going to go through big caps. It's not limited to any of these others. I put near in here because this is a good example of a newer altcoin, one that didn't have much previous history, because there's a lot of good comparisons here. So things like Sui, things like that, these are things that we can kind of look to expect. And just because they're newer, they can still have the same kind of performance. Okay, so this chart only goes back to December 2020, so very limited, but kind of the same thing. Even just eyeballing it, it did downtrend, downtrend, downtrend until what? Until January 2021, and did start going up. Okay, theirs was kind of unique though. Theirs was kind of all over the place. The timing was different. Even that initial spring pump, it didn't have it, right? Theirs was actually early April. And even their second peak was unique in that their actual true peak was January 2022. So it was well after. It did do well in November though. Did have a significant run up, but theirs was a little bit different. Okay, Chainlink was another one, and this is one that I was invested in 2021, as well as Solana. That's why I'm so big on Sol, but this is one that kind of left me with a bad taste just because it didn't do as well out of the other alts. As a matter of fact, out of the major alts, this was probably my worst performer, which it still did do well, but it just didn't run like a lot of the others. Okay, their run was actually in the bear market. If you look at their uptrend, this thing started way down here, right? Pretty much March 2020, that's when it had their major run up. If we look at the next portion, which again, it was pretty major, was again the same timeline, end of December, beginning of January. It went from about $11 peaking in May to 49 bucks, right? So it was still really good, but it's just not as explosive as some of the others. And you can see theirs was also unique in that their peak was in that May run. Okay, in the November run, it peaked out at about 30 something, about 34 bucks. Okay, we'll look at a few more because it's the same thing though. I'm sure you're getting the gist of it. So this is now, the reason I put helium in there is that it was a farther out, right? At the time, I think it was in the top 100 or so. I think during the peak, it was in the top 50 actually. So it did make it up pretty high. But exact same trend, right? It started upticking when? In that January time frame. Same thing, had their peak in, or their first peak in May, but the real peak for them was in November. Again, most of them, that was their real peak in November. Okay, and even looking at things at like Raven, for example, same thing. So even small, tiny microcap GPU coins kind of started in the same time frame. Theirs was a little bit later. Theirs was more like in February. I mean, you can make the argument for down here is when it started going up, but kind of the same thing. And their peak was also pretty unusual in that it was February 2021, right? So it went from essentially a penny the beginning of the year, right? January 1st, and then February 20th, 22 cents, right? So pretty crazy, and pretty crazy how fast it can happen. And you're going to see this more with these smaller cap alts because, again, it doesn't take as much liquidity to have that kind of effect. With things like ETH, Sol, XRP, etc., it takes a lot of capital, so it's going to take quite a bit more time to have those peaks. Okay, but just be aware of that. Ergo is another one we can look at real quick, and kind of same thing, right? When can we see kind of the uptrend? Theirs was also around February, actually. Kind of, again, make the argument for January, but realistically it was more like February. Same thing, they had a nice peak in May with the others, and then their real peak was farther down in September, ironically around the time of with Cardano with ADA, right? We do know they kind of have close affiliation there, so it's just an interesting thing to note. But you kind of get the gist of it, right? So even going farther down is just the same time frame, right? As soon as BTC dominance started going down, that's when things started going up for the alts. Okay, so again, it was that period of like 4 to 5 months, at least in that first peak. Right now, let's look at the second peak. Okay, and you can kind of see it here too. It's not as dramatic because that first drop was the real dramatic one. But the second one started around, if you look here at this dip, it was around August, somewhere around the mid to end of August, depending on the alt, ultimately going down and up and then peaking obviously in this November time frame, which was the peak. Okay, but again, the beginning of round two, which depending on your viewpoint, which one was the real top, it's hard to say, but November is when a lot more of them peaked, but we can see the uptrend began in August that time. Okay, so if we look at the same charts, again, kind of going through the gamut, we can kind of see it again. Okay, so we can see here, like ETH, for example, peaked in May, right? That was definitely the peak. Then we started the downtrend, and then when did it start upticking again? Around that same time frame, right? Around end of July, going into August. That's when we started going up and to the right, leading into that November, end of November time frame. Okay, but you can even see here, it wasn't up only. Okay, we did have a dip in September, which that's why September typically isn't a great month. Okay, typically we do have a rough month there, and then leading into the best months, which is October, November, potentially December this time. Okay, so one big differentiating factor this time, though, is what can potentially happen in September to kind of negate that possibility. Potential rate cuts. Okay, so even though typically September isn't too great, things can still uptrend because of that, depending on what happens. Now, if the opposite happens, right, we're all expecting this rate cut, and if we don't get a rate cut, this can be a little bit sharper, and that can definitely change things also, right? So that's why that September FOMC meeting is going to be huge. Okay, so the other thing to know in that time frame is that it's from what, the beginning to mid-August to November. It's only like a 3.5 month time frame where altcoin season was, and that's where we peaked with a lot of them. Okay, where are we at currently? August 11th, pretty similar time frame. Things are kind of happening again. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? This is only this little blip over here. We had a similar blip when we peaked in December, so we don't know if we're going to continue down. But if we do continue down, this is why everybody's eyeing it so much. This can be the beginning of these next 3 months that can be extremely bullish. Okay, so let's look at some of the others just for confirmation. So again, this is back to Solana, and then same thing. So we're saying what? August, right? So when did we start ticking up again? At the beginning of August. When did we peak out? 11.5, so November 5th. Again, at that point in August, we were 39 bucks, and we went all the way to 236 bucks. Cardano was a unique one. Their uptrend, though, was around the same time frame, though. Okay, so even though they did peak out early, their uptrend was around the same time. Okay, so again, theirs was end of July, peaking out in freaking the end of August, so in 1 month. Okay, but again, their uptrend really began at the beginning of the year, which is the case for most of them, right? Some had a more aggressive drop, some didn't drop as aggressively. It just kind of depended on the altcoin. Near is another one that again was unusual, but again, their uptrend or the beginning of the uptrend was around the same time also, right? July, the end of July, July 20th, you can clearly see it here. Ultimately, their November peak was decent, went up to 12 bucks, so it went from about $1.67 to around $12, but ultimately having their peak actually the following year in January 2022 to 17 bucks. Okay. Let's look at Link, kind of the same thing. You can see the beginning of the uptrend, almost exactly the same time, right? July 21st, and there's ultimately peaking in November 10th to 34 bucks. Helium being another example of this, which this to me is the better example because they did not peak in this initial run. They peaked in November like a lot of the others, but kind of the same thing, right? So mid to late July is when it started ticking up. Did have that dip in September with the others, and then so again, beginning of July or mid-July, we're at $9 and change, and then ultimately peaking to 47 bucks in November. Okay, Raven was an unusual one. We'll go to the next one. We'll go to Ergo. Kind of the same thing. When did the uptrend start? The end of July. When did we peak? Theirs, again, was a little bit early. It was the beginning of September. Okay, so going from $5.28 up to $18.73. Okay, in the span of about a month. Okay, but again, a majority of the uptick was prior to then. It was going from 75 cents to the beginning of 2021 up to that period. Okay, Nervos. Let's go to Nervos. Again, these are coins that are more in like the top 200 region. Kind of the same thing. Their uptrend started around the same time, going from about 0.008 all the way up to 0.029, so about 3 cents, so about 3.5x, which is significant, right? And then Cadena being probably the most exaggerated example just because theirs went up like freaking crazy, but you kind of see the same thing. You're eyeballing it. It's the beginning of August and of July, and then really accelerated in October, right? October 10th, it was $2, and 6 weeks later, over 20 bucks, around $21. Okay, even smaller coins, we can look at like Sia Coin, which is another one that's been around forever. If we look at the previous cycle, their peak was actually in the spring though, so they peaked earlier. April 21st is when they peaked. But again, the second uptick was the end of July, and their peak wasn't as great though, right? It was about 2 cents when they ended up peaking at versus in the spring, they were about double that. Okay, Flux being another example of this. Again, it's going to be the same or about the same time frames. Theirs was different though, kind of the same thing where they had a peak, they had a run up in April and May, I believe, but again, their real uptick was farther down the road. Theirs again started in August, ultimately peaking later on though. Their ultimate peak was January 2022. Their November peak was decent though. It was 242. Okay, so again from 10 cents in August to $2 and 40 something cents just a few months later. Okay, so that's where it's telling that again we're kind of starting at the same time frame. Is it potential that we peak again in November? Who knows, right? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But at the end of the day, the reason we're so excited, the reason we're looking at it is because potentially this is the beginning of it. So whether this uptrend lasts 2 to 3 months, or it lasts 6 to 8 months, or it goes 2 to 3 months and we do have a peak and then we bottom out and go back up again, who freaking knows, right? At this point, this is a very confusing cycle just because, again, it's been different, and it's been in some cases drastically different, especially with all the legislation, all the regulation, clear regulation happening, meaning now more institutional interest can definitely come in just because now there is clarity, especially with all the things with the SEC depending on classifying things as securities and commodities. That was always the big scare, right? We were one SEC lawsuit from that coin essentially getting nixed or being tied up in litigation for years and years and years, like XRP, or in some cases, them not even being able to do anything about it and going to zero. If you guys remember Library Coin, which is a mineable coin, it essentially killed them. Okay, a lot of that worry is gone. More money can start inflowing in. We saw this thing recently with retirement accounts now also being able to invest into crypto. Again, even getting a small sliver of that is massive. Okay, so again, anything can happen. We're looking at different things, but at the end of the day, this is the reason we're so bullish on altcoin season, just because again, we can see clearly what's happened in the charts. It looks like this is potentially the beginning. We don't know for sure yet. It's not really confirmed. We're gonna have to wait a few more weeks and see if BTC dominance continues to drop, as well as ETH dominance and others continuing to go up. Will this trend continue? Is it a fake out? Is it going to be something that we saw in December? It's also potential, right? But at the end of the day, we're looking at this because there's still time to invest in a lot of these alts, which is where my focus has been, right? At this point in the cycle, it doesn't make sense to be investing in hardware, okay? It makes much more sense to get as many coins as quickly as possible, especially if there is a peak here in the next 3 months. Again, will it happen? Won't it happen? We don't know, but I want to be prepared in case it does. Okay, and if it doesn't, it just gives me more time to accumulate more, and potentially if it doesn't peak in like November, December timeframe, it does definitely make the argument for a much larger, more exaggerated cycle beyond that. Okay, will it happen? Won't it happen? Things are looking like it definitely could happen. I'm definitely more on the possibility of that front. But at the same time, when the consensus seems to be that way, I don't know if you guys watch a lot of other content, which I definitely do. The consensus almost seems to be unanimous with it extending beyond this November, December timeframe, leading into 2026. Okay, and when I see so many people on that same thought process, I'm definitely skeptical, right? Which is the reason we are looking at all these indicators. Look at the signs, look at what's happening, and understand what it is. Okay, and have your own interpretation of it. Again, people's interpretation of some of these things are completely different. None of these things are fixed. We're all just looking at trends, things that have happened in the past, and things that kind of make sense, right? Why are we saying it makes sense? Because this is what's happened in the past, and this is a way for a lot of these whales to continue to make money, right? Essentially, they peak with Bitcoin, they sell their position there because it's probably doesn't have a whole lot of upside, go into bigger cap alts, max that out, go into lower cap alts, etc., right? And it does trickle down to even some of the smaller coins. Is it going to go to every single coin? No, but it's going to go to those coins that potentially have a reason to, right? So ASIC coins, VC coins, because again, those VCs are going to want their money back. ASIC coins, because again, a lot of these manufacturers pre-mine with a lot of these things. A lot of them do have large bags. They are investors. They are holders, market makers, and the same thing even with GPU coins. You have the argument there that in the past, at least, there was a lot of GPU mining whales. Isn't necessarily the case this time. It's hard to say because we've seen a lot of them does seem like they have capitulated. They have sold off hardware. A lot of them are still there, but it's definitely not at the same extent as it was previously. We're going to have to wait and see. Again, this is why I keep saying we play the game of probability. We're looking at who's most likely to pump. We don't know which ones. Some are going to underperform and only do like a 2 to 3x from here, even being a smaller cap. And some will overperform. Some will do 5, 10, and depending on the coin, if it's a tiny market cap coin especially, which is why a lot of us have those degen bets to a lot of these things. Again, it doesn't take a lot of capital for this to happen, to go from 80 cents to 25 bucks. There are going to be coins that do that, whether it's going to be any of these, it'll be meme coins, it'll be whatever coins. Again, follow your niche, follow the things you're into to kind of look for these trends, look for these possibilities, right? So at a time when people are all doom and gloom and all whatever, let them be whatever. Be smart about it, look at the signs, look at the indicators. And to me, things are starting to go in that direction. Will it, won't it? We don't know. But again, we're focused. We're here. This is the time to make money. Pay attention. Okay. Let me know in the comments though, guys. What do you guys think? Do you guys kind of agree? Like, what is your take on altcoin season? Is it your take that it's the beginning of the uptrend that's anywhere from like a 3 to 5 month period, sometimes more, sometimes less? Or is it literally this peak that people seem to mention over and over? Again, to me, this is a part of the altcoin season, but this is the end of the altcoin season. This is the full degen phase when everybody goes in. Or do you think that's really it? Or do you see this uptrend being it? Right? So to me, that's kind of why it's called a season, right? And to me, these are blow off tops. But let me know your interpretation, guys. Let me know in the comments. Please comment, like, and subscribe, guys. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'm out.